Hi, I just woke up and I woke up from such a nice sleep, and I I want to read to you what I wrote last night. Uh, I wrote something, and but first I want to say something about my sleep because it was so peculiar. I kept waking up and then just now, but I was still asleep and I could still fall back asleep. I like that so much, when you are still, when you wake up and you kind of still fall back asleep again. That's so nice. Anyway, instead of witnessing our so-called mind and our thoughts, we say what we want to say in embodied language, and we realize that witnessing our thoughts is just as much a fantasy as having thoughts. Yes, there are no thoughts. There are no thoughts. There is no inner language, and the only way in which we are finally accepting and experiencing this fact is when we say whatever is in our attention and when we listen to the sound of our own voice. Only then our language simply unfolds, which means it doesn't come from within, but it just happens because it can happen. A lot could be said, but it isn't said because we don't want to say it. This is such a peculiar thing. From our conditioning history, we have been saying many things that we actually didn't want to say. So we keep wanting to say things which, when we listen to it, we really don't want to say it. Of course, saying what we don't want to say, it has always prevented what we wanted to say, and it had to be stopped. However, once we say what we want to say, we find out there are things we don't want to say, not because it prevents us from having embodied language, but because we have better things to say. This is such a revelation that a different version of who we are can be expressed, because the old version has withered away, it has transcended, it has dissolved, disappeared. We cannot be anymore who we once were, and we have become enlightened, which is to say, we are happy just being ourselves. It also doesn't matter that we have been conditioned with disembodied language, because we know what it is. Yes, there will be times when disembodied language rears its ugly head, but we don't let this happen, as we don't want that to happen. We do whatever it takes to stop our disembodied language, and we succeed because our commitment is total. Initially, when we first discover the difference between disembodied language and embodied language, we still go back and forth between our disembodied language and our embodied language. We still go back and forth quite a lot. But as time goes by, our embodied language continues steadily, like a wide river reaching the ocean. We have surrendered to ourselves and to our language, and this is a completely different kind of surrender than any other kind of surrender, which was always to something else than to ourselves and to our own language. Our embodied language expresses our language enlightenment, and we like to continue with that, as that is what we enjoy doing. It is so simple. If it doesn't feel good, we just don't want to do it. Now we have the language to instruct ourselves to not do what we don't want to do. Our embodied language always works and has positive consequences, and our disembodied language always drags us down if we let it. We let it because again and again we aren't important enough to ourselves to be able to have what we want to have. So this is why we keep having disembodied language. We let it continue because again and again we are not important enough to ourselves to be able to have what we want to have. Our embodied language tells us otherwise. It always makes us have what we want as we allow ourselves what we want. We are allowed to long for it. We are allowed to search for it. We are allowed to find it back. And even if we lose it again, we will find it back again, always. We are never done achieving our embodied language, yeah? It's an ongoing thing every day. And we work every day. And this is how we live, and we love this work. We reap the fruits of our actions, and this is why we have what nobody else has, because they refuse to do what it takes to have embodied language. And nobody tells us to do what we do, as we want to do what we do, as we have experienced the consequences of our embodied language. We have never failed ourselves with our embodied language. And this is why, in spite of our conditioning history or the conditioning history of others, we carry on our lives with our embodied language. We see and we acknowledge the challenge as a great opportunity, and our fearlessness is just awesome. There is strength in our sensitivity, not only to survive, but to thrive. We feel so fortunate to have come as far as we have, as we felt so vulnerable to the rejection of others. Our power emerges from the fact that we accept ourselves with our embodied language, and we aren't waiting for anyone to do what we have already done ourselves. Moreover, we have the power to reject not only our own disembodied language, but also the disembodied language of others. We are no longer troubled by anyone or anything, as we are the master of our own lives. Our language enlightenment is characterized by all the behaviors that belong to our embodied language. Even the smallest actions enhance and support our embodied language, and our productivity is at its peak. We do all sorts of things that really matter, as it all fits with our embodied language. In effect, each single detail of our lives is meaningful.